I did not look at my brother when he walked in. I heard him the way his shoes clicked against the marble floor of the conference room. The way he pulled out the chair across from me, with that particular drag that meant he was performing for someone. He had always performed. Even as a child, he would cry louder when he knew an adult was watching. I kept my eyes on the window. The parking lot below was gray and wet. It had been raining since early morning. My name is Claire. I am 31 years old. And 3 weeks before that morning, my father had died. I should say that differently. My father had died, and my brother had immediately hired a lawyer. His name is Daniel. He is 4 years older than me, and for most of my life, he has been the one our parents introduced first at dinner parties, the one whose college graduation photo sat on the mantel in the living room, the one my mother called when she needed something fixed, even though I was the one who always showed up. He sold commercial real estate in Phoenix. He drove a truck that was too large for the city he lived in. He had 3 children whose birthdays I remembered, and he did not. The lawyer sitting beside him was a man named Foster, gray suit, gold watch, the kind of man who looks like he has spent 30 years being confident in rooms where he had no business being confident. He set a folder on the table and did not open it yet. That was intentional. I had been in enough meetings to recognize a power move when I saw one. My lawyer, a woman named Patricia, sat to my left. She was small and quiet and had said almost nothing since we arrived. I had hired her 14 months earlier, for a completely different reason. She had not been surprised when I called her about this. Foster cleared his throat. "Miss Claire," he said, with the particular inflection that meant he had decided not to use my last name on purpose. "I think we can resolve this quickly if everyone is willing to be reasonable." I said nothing. My client is simply asking for what is fair. Your father's estate, the property in Flagstaff, the joint investment accounts, and the business holdings were always understood by the family to be divided equally. Your father's verbal intentions were clear to everyone present at numerous family gatherings over the years. I looked at him then. "Verbal," I said. "That is correct." "You are contesting a written will," I said, with verbal. Foster smiled the way people smile when they think they are about to win. "We are arguing that the written document does not reflect your father's true intentions, and that certain influences may have shaped the final version in ways that did not serve the whole family." I understood what he was saying. He was saying that I had manipulated my father. He was saying it carefully, with a law degree and a gold watch, but that is what he was saying. My brother had not looked at me since he sat down. I had been 22 years old when I left Arizona. I had told my parents I was taking a job in the Pacific Northwest, which was true in the same way that a photograph of a mountain is true, accurate, but incomplete. My father had hugged me at the airport. My mother had cried. My brother had not come. He said he had a showing. For the first 3 years, I called home every Sunday. My mother and I talked for an hour sometimes more. My father got on the phone occasionally, mostly to ask about the weather, and to tell me a joke he had read somewhere. My brother and I exchanged texts on holidays, happy Thanksgiving, safe travels, the kind of messages that mean nothing, and are sent to mean nothing. In year 4, my mother was diagnosed. It was her kidneys first, then complications that spread outward the way bad news tends to do, each new thing arriving before you had finished processing the last. She was in and out of the hospital for 8 months. My father, who had always been physically capable and emotionally avoidant, did not handle it well. He stopped cooking. He stopped keeping track of appointments. He called me one Tuesday at 6 in the morning. I was still in a different time zone and he just said her name. Just said Claire and then said her name and stopped talking. I started flying home every 6 weeks. My brother sent flowers twice. This is not bitterness. I want to be clear about that. I am not telling this story because I want anyone to feel sorry for me or angry at him. I am telling it because it is the foundation of everything that came after, and the foundation has to be solid before you build anything on top of it. My mother survived. She came out of it slower, quieter, with a softness around her eyes that had not been there before. My father came out of it with a dependence on routine, and a deep distrust of being alone. He started calling me every few days. Not just Sundays anymore. 3 years after my mother's illness, my father was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. By then I had built a life that looked very different from what anyone in my family understood. The job I had taken at 22 had evolved in ways I was not permitted to discuss in detail. I had signed agreements. I had obligation. When my father asked me what exactly I did all day, I told him I worked in logistics and analysis for a government contractor, which was a version of true. And he nodded, and said that sounded stable. And I said yes. It was very stable, and neither of us pushed further. What I could tell him, I was good at my job. I had been promoted 4 times. I had a salary that would have shocked him if I had said the number out loud. And I never said the number out loud. I paid my own rent and my own insurance, and I sent money home every month starting the year my mother got sick. Not as a loan, not with any expectation. I just set up the transfer, and it happened on the 1st of every month, and I never mentioned it. My brother did not know about the transfers. I know this because if he had known, he would have said something about it years earlier. When my father's condition progressed, it became clear that someone needed to be more present. I requested a reassignment. It took 4 months to process, but eventually, I was given a position that allowed me to work primarily from a home office and travel less than before. I moved back to Flagstaff 18 months before my father died. I moved into the house. I drove him to his appointments. I managed his medications. I learned to cook the 3 things he would reliably eat when his appetite was poor. I sat with him in the evenings and watched whatever he wanted to watch on television, and did not complain when it was the same documentary about World War II, for the 4th time. My brother visited twice, once for Thanksgiving, once because he said he was passing through on the way to somewhere else. The last time my father and I talked about the will, he was sitting in the armchair by the front window. It was November, and the light came in low and flat across the floor. He said he wanted me to know that he had been fair. He said he had thought carefully about what was right. He said he was sorry that it had taken him so long to see certain things clearly. I told him he did not need to apologize for anything. He said, "Some things you see better when you don't have much time left." He died 6 weeks later, quietly, in the morning, the way he had lived without much noise. The will left everything to me. My brother hired Foster within the week. So that is where we were, in that gray conference room with the rain outside and the unopened folder on the table. Foster continued. He was talking about family legacy, about fairness, about how my brother had always been involved in the family's financial life. I let him talk. Patricia took notes. I watched my brother's hands on the table flat, still, the posture of someone rehearsing patience. Then Foster said it. Claire has not held a conventional position of employment in nearly a decade. She returned to the family home under circumstances that remain, frankly, unclear. My client believes, and we are prepared to demonstrate, that Claire leveraged her caretaking role to influence an elderly man with a degenerative condition into changing his estate documents in her favor. The room was quiet for a moment. Patricia looked up from her notes. I looked at my brother. This time, he looked back. "Daniel," I said, "is that what you believe?" He looked at the table. "I think Dad wasn't himself at the end. He was himself every single day that I was there. You would know that if you had come." Foster interjected. "We're not here to." "I know why we're here," I said. I turned back to him. "You want to argue that I am a woman without meaningful employment who moved home to take advantage of a sick parent. That is your argument." He adjusted his watch. "We are arguing that the estate distribution does not reflect your father's long-standing wishes, and you are prepared to take this to court. If necessary, yes." I nodded slowly. I picked up my coffee cup and took a sip. It had gone cold, but I didn't mind. "All right," I said. Patricia looked at me briefly. I gave her the smallest nod. She closed her folder. "We'll see you in court," I said. I had worked very hard for a very long time to be the kind of person who can say something like that and mean it without any performance in it at all. It took 4 months to get a court date. During those 4 months, Foster's office sent a series of requests for financial records, for documentation of employment, for evidence of my contributions to the household. Patricia responded to each one, in the careful, methodical way she responded to everything. She never rushed. She never over-explained. She gave them what they were entitled to and not a single thing more. I continued living in my father's house. I continued working from the home office. Some mornings I would sit in the armchair by the front window, the one my father had always used, and drink my coffee and watch the light come in and feel the particular weight of a house that knows it is waiting. My brother called me once during those 4 months. I missed the call. I did not call back. This is the thing about grief, that people do not tell you. Sometimes it sharpens you. Sometimes the loss of a person clarifies exactly who you are willing to keep. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent overhead lights, the smell of carpet that had absorbed too many years of anxiety. The gallery had maybe 20 seats, and about half of them were filled some neighbors. A cousin I recognized from childhood. 2 women I did not know who had a court schedule printout, and seemed to be there for the entertainment of it all. I sat at the defendant's table with Patricia. My brother sat across the aisle with Foster. He was wearing a dark blue suit that looked new. He had gotten a haircut. He was performing again. The judge came in and everyone stood. She was a woman in her mid-50s, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck. She moved to the bench without looking at anyone in particular. Her name, according to the case paperwork, was the Honorable Judge Margaret Okafor. I had known that name for 2 months. I had not told Patricia everything. There are things you hold quietly, not because you are hiding them, but because some information has weight, and you carry it differently when you are the only one holding it. Foster opened the case with precision. He had clearly practiced. He talked about my father's values, about the family's agricultural roots, about the legacy of a man who had always believed in equal distribution among his children. He talked about the timeline of the will changes. There had been 2 amendments in the last 18 months of my father's life, both of which had increased my share. He framed each amendment as evidence of manipulation, rather than of a man who was thinking clearly and changing his mind. He called my brother to the stand first. Daniel was composed. He talked about our father with genuine emotion. I will say that, whatever his faults, he had loved our father in the way that people love what they fail to protect. He said our father had been confused in his final months. He said our father had sometimes repeated himself, had sometimes forgotten conversations. He said he was worried that Claire had taken advantage of that. The word he used was influenced. Foster let that word sit in the air for a moment, before he moved on. Then he called a neighbor, an older man named Gerald, who had lived 2 streets over for 30 years. Gerald said he had always understood the family to be close, that Daniel had been a devoted son, that he had seen Claire come and go over the years but had not known her well. He called a financial advisor who had worked with my father briefly, who testified that the account changes in the final 18 months were unusual, compared to my father's earlier patterns. Then Foster stood up and looked at me. We'd like to call Claire to the stand. I stood. I walked to the stand. I sat down and looked out at the room. I found my brother's face. He was watching me with something that was almost sadness, and I thought not for the first time that in a different life, we might have been close. Foster approached slowly. Claire, he said, can you tell the court your current occupation? I work in operations and analysis. For whom? I am under a non-disclosure agreement regarding the specific details of my employer and the nature of my work. A low murmur moved through the gallery. You cannot tell this court who employs you. I can tell you that I am employed. I can tell you that my employment is legal, full-time, and has been continuous for 9 years. But you cannot provide documentation. Patricia Rose. Your Honor, we have submitted documentation through proper channels, as discussed in pretrial proceedings. Judge Okafor looked at Foster. Counsel, the documentation matter was addressed in chambers. Move on. Foster adjusted his approach. Claire, is it true that you have not filed a conventional W-2 tax return in the past 7 years? My taxes are filed through a specific federal process. I am not at liberty to explain the details. So from the outside, Foster said, and I could hear him building towards something. From the perspective of your family, you appear to have returned home after nearly a decade of vague employment, moved into your elderly father's home, and spent 18 months in close daily contact with him, while his estate documents were amended twice in your favor. I looked at him. From the outside, I said. That is one way to describe it. How would you describe it? I would describe it as taking care of my father, while unemployed. While employed. But you cannot prove that to this court. Patricia stood. Your Honor? Judge Okafor held up one hand. She had been watching me since I took the stand. She had not looked at her papers in several minutes. She was watching me the way someone watches a face they are trying to place. Counsel, she said to Foster. I'd like to take a 10-minute recess. The gallery murmured again. Foster looked briefly caught off guard, then composed himself. Of course, Your Honor. Everyone stood as Judge Okafor stepped down from the bench. She walked past the gallery. She walked past the side wall, and then she stopped directly beside Patricia's table, which is to say, directly beside me. She was looking at the lapel of my jacket. I had worn it without thinking. Or maybe not without thinking, maybe I had worn it because there are habits that become so deeply part of you that they stop feeling like choices. A small pin on the left lapel. Silver. A geometric shape, a bird with its wings closed, angular and precise. Judge Okafor looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at me. Something passed between us that I cannot fully describe. Recognition. The particular understanding that exists between people who have operated in the same world, who have sat in the same kinds of rooms, who have learned the same specific discipline of stillness. She did not say anything. She walked out the side door. The recess lasted 22 minutes. When Judge Okafor returned, she did not take the bench immediately. She spoke quietly with the clerk. The clerk made a phone call. Patricia looked at me sideways, and I gave her the same small nod I had given her in the conference room 4 months earlier. When Judge Okafor finally sat down, she removed her reading glasses from the chain and held them in her hand. Before we continue, she said, I am going to ask the gallery to clear, with the exception of counsel and the parties directly involved in this proceeding. Foster stood. Your Honor, this is a public proceeding. I am aware of that, counsel. This request is temporary and will be documented. It relates to the handling of sensitive material. She looked at him steadily. You may object at the appropriate time. The gallery cleared. The neighbor, the cousin, the 2 women with the schedule printout, they filed out slowly, looking back over their shoulders. When the doors closed, Judge Okafor looked at Patricia. Counsel, I understand you have submitted documentation to the court that requires a modified review process. Patricia stood. Yes, Your Honor. I am going to ask you to bring that documentation forward at this time. Patricia opened her bag. Not the folder she had been taking notes in, but a separate flat case that had been beside her chair since we arrived. She walked it to the bench. She placed it in front of Judge Okafor. It was a sealed envelope. The seal was a federal one. I will not describe it further. Judge Okafor looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at me. Then she opened it. The courtroom was very quiet. She read for 4 minutes. I know because I counted. When she finished, she set the papers down with a careful, deliberate movement. She put her reading glasses back on the chain. She folded her hands on the bench. Mr. Foster, she said. He stood. He was trying to look confident. He had not fully succeeded. Your line of questioning regarding your opposing party's employment status and ability to provide documentation, you are withdrawing it. It was not a question. Foster opened his mouth, closed it. Your Honor, I'm not sure I understand the basis. The basis is before you if you would like to review it, counsel. I would, however, recommend against it. In a room that is still technically on record. She looked at him over the top of the bench. You are withdrawing the line of questioning. A long pause. Yes, Your Honor. The documentation submitted establishes that the opposing party has been continuously employed for 9 years in a federal capacity that carries a classification level precluding public disclosure. It further establishes, she paused, glanced at the papers, that the opposing party's presence in Flagstaff during the period in question was, in part, a sanctioned arrangement given certain proximity considerations. She set the papers down again. Which means, to summarize for the record, that the framing of this case, that a woman without income or purpose returned home to exploit a vulnerable parent, is not only factually incorrect, but is specifically, documentably incorrect. My brother had turned in his seat. He was looking at me. I did not look away. Judge Okafor continued. I am also noting for the record that financial transaction records submitted by the defense show a pattern of monthly transfers into the family accounts dating back 7 years initiated by the defendant, consistent in amount, never requested, and never acknowledged by the plaintiff's family. These transfers total, she looked at the paper again, a significant sum, significantly more than the value of the estate being contested. The room was still. Foster was no longer performing confidence. He was writing something on his notepad with the focused energy of a man who needed something to do with his hands. My brother's face had changed. The rehearsed composure was gone. What was left was something younger, something that looked like the face of the boy who had not come to the airport when I left. Judge Okafor looked at him directly. Your sister, she said, has been quietly supporting your family for 7 years. She moved home to care for your father. She was present. The will reflects the judgment of a man who had time and clarity to see what actually happened, not a man who was confused. She paused. I want to be careful about my language in a courtroom setting, so I will simply say that I find no evidence of undue influence. I find extensive evidence of undue absence. Foster requested a short recess. He spent it in the hallway, talking to my brother in a low, tight voice. I sat at the table and drank water. Patricia sat next to me, quiet and still, in the way of someone who had always known how this was going to end. When they came back in, Foster stood and said his client was withdrawing the contest. The words were precise, formal, bloodless. They took about 20 seconds. My brother did not look at me when they were said. Afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, I was putting my coat on when I heard him behind me. Claire. I turned. He looked older than he had an hour ago. That is the only way I know to say it. The new suit looked wrong on him now, like he had borrowed it. Why didn't you tell me? He said. It came out less like a question, and more like something that had been sitting in his chest for a long time. I thought about all the things I could say. I thought about the airport and the Thanksgiving he skipped, and the flowers he sent twice, and the phone calls I had made alone in a hospital parking lot because I did not want to worry him. You never asked, I said. He didn't have an answer for that. He looked at the floor, then at the window at the end of the hallway, then back at me. I didn't know about the money, he said. I know. I would have. You wouldn't have, I said. Not unkindly, just as a fact. You would have said it wasn't necessary. You would have felt uncomfortable. We would have had a conversation where you said you didn't want to accept it, and I would have said I wasn't asking, and then I would have kept sending it anyway. I put my hands in my coat pockets, so I just skipped to the last part. He was quiet for a long time. Dad knew? He asked. Toward the end. He found the transfers when he was going through some paperwork. He asked me about them. I looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The parking lot was wet and still, he cried. Which was the only time I ever saw him do that. My brother made a sound that was not quite a word. He said he was sorry he hadn't looked more closely, I said. I told him what I'm telling you. It wasn't about looking. It was about being there when things were hard. That's the only thing that matters. I picked up my bag. Patricia was waiting by the elevator at the end of the hall. She had a small, contained expression that I had come to understand was her version of satisfaction. Daniel, I said, and he looked up. The house is still the house. Nothing has to be strange between us going forward. That's your choice, not mine. I walked down the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Behind me, I heard nothing, no footsteps, no voice. Just the quiet of a building on a Tuesday afternoon in December. In the elevator, Patricia said. You knew she would recognize it. I thought she might. You could have told me. I know. I looked at the floor numbers changing. Some things you carry alone until you don't have to anymore. Outside, the air was cold and clear. I sat in my car for a moment before starting it. On the dash, I had set the pin before going in. I never wore it into federal buildings out of habit, but today had not been a federal building. Today had been something else. I picked it up and held it in my palm. My father had asked me about it once, near the end. He had seen it on my desk and picked it up and turned it over in his fingers. I told him it was something I had been given when I finished a particular kind of training. He had looked at it for a long time. Are you proud of what you do? He had asked me. Yes, I said. He had set the pin back down carefully, like it was something fragile. Good, he said. That's all I ever wanted to know. I put the pin back on my lapel. I started the car. The road out of town ran west, into the long flat light of a winter afternoon, and I drove it the way I had learned to do most things in my life without looking back, and without needing anyone to tell me I had done it right.